The town of Harmony was a testament to a stubborn hope. It wasn't on the way to anywhere important, which was precisely why its dozen families had chosen it. Nestled in a shallow, well-watered valley in the Texas Hill Country, it was a place of quiet, hard-working folk who had made a pact with the land and with each other. At the heart of the town, both geographically and spiritually, was the blacksmith's forge. Ben Travis was a man built on the same scale as the work he did. He was a mountain of a man, with arms and shoulders corded with the dense, powerful muscle of a decade spent swinging a hammer. His face, usually smudged with soot, was kind, his eyes a gentle, steady blue that held no hint of the storm that lay dormant in his soul. To the people of Harmony, he was their anchor. He mended their plows, shoed their horses, and fixed their children's toys with the same patient, focused care. He was a creator, a mender, a man whose hands brought broken things back to wholeness. His own life had been mended here. 10 years ago, he had arrived with nothing but a haunted look in his eyes and a baby daughter wrapped in a blanket. He had built the forge, and then his life, from the ground up. He had buried the man he used to be, a man known by a different name in the bloody border territories, a man they called the ghost of the Brazos. He had traded the cold weight of a gun for the solid, honest weight of a hammer. His daughter, Lily, was the center of his new world. At 16, she was a wildflower, possessing her late mother's fiery red hair and her father's steady blue eyes. She was smart, spirited, and the only person in the world who could make the giant blacksmith smile with a simple, teasing word. She ran his small house with a cheerful efficiency and brought him his lunch at the forge every day, her presence a bright, welcome light in the smoky darkness of his work. "Father," she said, her voice a clear bell over the ring of his hammer as she entered the forge that afternoon. "You'll work yourself into an early grave if you don't stop for a bite." Ben stopped, the heavy hammer coming to rest as if it weighed nothing. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, leaving a dark smudge, and a genuine, soul-deep smile transformed his face. "Just finishing this brace for the miller's wagon. They're heading out tomorrow to sell their crops." "They're worried," Lily said, her own smile fading slightly as she unpacked a lunch of bread, cheese, and an apple. "Everyone is. The rumors about that man Croft." The name fell into the quiet of the forge like a cold stone. Silas the Vulture Croft. He was a land baron, a cancer that was spreading across the territory. He didn't buy land, he acquired it, through intimidation, violence, and a ruthless efficiency that left a trail of broken families and abandoned homesteads in his wake. His shadow had been creeping closer to Harmony for months. "It's just talk, Lily Flower," Ben said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble, though his eyes had gone hard for a moment. "He's got no interest in a small valley like ours." But they both knew he was lying. He had seen Croft's riders, hard-faced men with rifles slung on their saddles, watching the valley from the high ridges. He had felt the familiar, cold prickle on the back of his neck, the hunter's instinct he had tried for so long to kill. The attack came that night without warning, and with a terrible, hellish fury. It began with fire. Torches were thrown onto the dry roofs of the general store and the livery stable. The flames, fanned by the hot night wind, roared to life, painting the peaceful town in the colors of damnation. Gunfire erupted, a wild, chaotic fusillade that was not aimed to kill, but to terrorize, to drive the panicked townspeople from their homes and into the street. Ben reacted on pure, paternal instinct. He grabbed the heavy shotgun he kept by the door and shoved Lily into the small, stone-walled root cellar. "Stay here, no matter what you hear," he commanded, his face a mask of terrible resolve. "Bar the door." He stepped out into the nightmare. The town he had helped build, the sanctuary he had forged, was being consumed by fire and chaos. He saw them then, a dozen riders, their faces lit by the inferno they had created. They were not just scaring the townsfolk, they were systematically looting the homes, rounding up the horses, their movements a brutal, practiced dance of destruction. At their head rode a tall man in a long, dark duster, his face a cruel, hawk-like mask of triumph. Silas Croft. Ben raised his shotgun, the rage in his heart a pure, cold thing. He was a father protecting his child, a man protecting his home. He fired both barrels, the roar of the gun a defiant shout in the chaos. One of Croft's men screamed and tumbled from his saddle. But he was one man against a dozen. Before he could reload, A blow from behind, the heavy, wooden stock of a rifle, sent him crashing to his knees, his vision exploding in a shower of white-hot stars. He fought to stay conscious, his head ringing, the world a blurry, tilting hellscape. Through the haze, he saw Croft dismount and stride towards his house. He saw him kick open the cellar door, which Lily had not had time to properly bar. He saw the firelight glint on Lily's red hair as she was dragged, kicking and screaming, from the darkness. "A fiery little flower," Croft said, a cruel smile twisting his lips as he held the struggling girl. "You'll make a fine piece of leverage to ensure the rest of this valley understands my claim." Ben tried to get up, a guttural, animal roar of fury and despair tearing from his throat. But another blow, harder this time, sent him plunging into a deep, welcome darkness. The last thing he heard before the world went black was his daughter's terrified scream, and the triumphant, cruel laughter of the man who had taken her, as the town of Harmony burned around them. Ben Travis returned to a world of ash and silence. Consciousness came back slowly, a painful, throbbing ascent from a deep, black pit. The first thing he was aware of was the stench of the sharp, acrid smell of burnt pine and the coppery, metallic tang of blood. The second was the pain, a blinding, skull-splitting agony that seemed to radiate from the back of his head. He pushed himself up, his powerful body protesting, his vision swimming. The world was a gray, smoldering ruin. The livery stable and the general store were skeletal, blackened husks, their frames stark against the pale, indifferent light of the dawn. Smaller fires still licked at the remains of other homes, sending thin, greasy plumes of smoke into the morning sky. His own home was still standing, but its door was a splintered, gaping mouth. He stumbled to his feet, his mind a frantic, chaotic storm. "Lily," he croaked, his voice a raw, broken sound. He lurched towards the house, his heart a cold, heavy stone of dread in his chest. The root cellar was empty. The house was empty. She was gone. The townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces smudged with soot, their eyes wide with shock and grief. They were a flock without a shepherd, their sanctuary in ruins. They gathered around Ben, their questions a low, mournful buzz. But Ben didn't hear them. He was staring at the ground, at the churned-up dust where a dozen horses had stood. He saw the tracks leading away, heading east, towards the broken lands, the lawless territories. He saw the smaller, scuffed prints where Lily had struggled. A new, terrible clarity began to cut through the pain and the confusion. He walked, with a slow, deliberate purpose, not to his house, but to his forge. The forge, with its stone walls and earthen floor, had been untouched by the flames. It was his sanctuary, his place of creation. Now, it would become his armory. He ignored the horseshoes and the wagon braces. He walked to the back of the forge, to the large, stone-quenching trough that was always kept full of water. He reached into the cold, black water, his arms submerged to the elbow. His fingers found what they were looking for, a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped bundle. He pulled it from the water and placed it on the anvil, the same anvil where he had hammered out a new, peaceful life for himself. He unwrapped it with a slow, reverent care. The contents were not the tools of a blacksmith. They were the tools of a killer. To cold peacemakers, their barrels accustomed, short in length, their grips made of a dark, polished mesquite wood. They were a perfectly matched pair, the instruments of a deadly artist. Beside them lay a gun belt, its leather dark with age and use, its holsters hanging at a sharp, aggressive angle, designed for a cross-draw. And last, a long, heavy-bladed bowie knife, its edge still honed to a razor's sharpness. He stripped off his leather apron, the symbol of his trade, of the man he had tried to be. He strapped on the gun belt, the familiar weight settling on his hips like a long-lost limb. He checked the action of the Colts, the cylinder spinning with a smooth, deadly click. He loaded them, his movements economical and precise, the muscle memory of 1,000 such loadings returning as if it had never been gone. The townspeople, who had followed him to the forge, watched in a stunned, fearful silence. They were seeing a transformation, a resurrection. The gentle, giant blacksmith was gone. In his place stood a figure of cold, terrifying purpose. The scars on his knuckles, the old, faded rope burn on his neck, the way his gentle blue eyes had turned to chips of ice, it all suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. He was no longer Ben Travis. He was the ghost of the Brazos. And the ghost had awakened. He walked to his house and returned with a rifle and a small canvas sack of supplies. He went to the corral and saddled his own horse, a powerful, dark-eyed bay that was the only animal the raiders had missed. He mounted, the rifle sliding easily into the scabbard on his saddle. He looked down at the people of Harmony, at their lost, frightened faces. "Barricade what's left of the town," he said, and his voice was different, a low, hard rumble that held no trace of its former warmth. "Send a rider to the county seat. Tell the sheriff what happened. Tell him Ben Travis is handling it." He did not want them to know his old name. That name brought nothing but trouble and blood. He turned his horse, not looking at their stunned faces, not looking at the ruins of his home. He looked east, towards the broken lands, his eyes narrowing into a hunter's squint. "Father Ben, wait," a voice called out. It was the blacksmith's apprentice, a boy named Tom, his face pale. "You can't go alone. There's too many of them." Ben Travis looked down at the boy, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of the old, kind man returned to his eyes. "Stay here, son," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Help these people rebuild. That's your fight." He then spurred his horse, and the powerful bay leaped forward, carrying him away from the smoking ruins of his life, away from the man he had been, and into the vast and forgiving wilderness. He was a singular, unstoppable force of nature, a father's grief and a killer's rage fused into a single, terrible purpose. He was a ghost, and he was going hunting. The world for Ben Travis became a simple, brutal equation, the trail, and the man at the end of it. The grief, the fear, the rage, he packed it all down into a cold, hard place deep inside him, a place that had been dormant for 10 years. That place was the engine that drove him now. It was the source of his focus, his endurance, his utter, single-minded purpose. He was not just a father chasing his daughter's kidnappers. He was the ghost of the Brazos, and he was on a hunt. The skills that had made him a legend on the border, the skills he had tried so hard to forget, came back to him as naturally as breathing. He read the trail not just with his eyes, but with his entire being. He saw not just the hoof prints of a dozen horses, but the story they told. He saw the deep, gouged tracks of a large group riding hard, their arrogance making them careless. He saw the single, smaller set of prints from a horse that was being led, the way it stumbled occasionally, a sign of its terrified and willing passenger, Lily. He pushed his horse, the powerful bay, at a relentless pace, a pace that would have killed a lesser animal. But he was a master horseman, and he knew how to conserve the animal's strength, how to read its limits. He rode through the day and into the night, the pale sliver of a moon his only guide. He did not need to see the tracks, he could feel the direction of their flight, a hunter's instinct, a magnetic pull towards his quarry. For Lily, the world had become a living nightmare. She was slung over the front of a saddle, her hands bound, her body aching with every jarring step of the horse. The man she was forced to ride with was one of Croft's lieutenants, a brutish, bearded man who smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed sweat. But she was her father's daughter. She did not cry. She did not plead. She observed. She memorized the faces of the men, their names, the way they spoke. She listened to their conversations, their boasts about the burning of Harmony, their casual cruelty. And she fought, in a quiet, subtle way. She made herself a dead weight, making the horse stumble, slowing them down. She feigned a greater weakness than she felt, forcing them to stop more often than they wanted to. Every minute she could delay them was another minute for her father to get closer. She had no doubt that he was coming. She had always known, on some deep, intuitive level, that her gentle, giant father was more than just a blacksmith. She had seen the stillness in him, the way his eyes would sometimes go distant and hard, the way he could move his massive frame with a silent, startling grace. She didn't know the story of the ghost of the Brazos, but she knew the soul of the man, and she knew he would walk through hell itself to get her back. She knew she had to help him. She had to leave him a sign, a clue that only he would understand. On her 16th birthday, her father had forged a small, delicate silver locket for her, in the shape of a prairie lily. It was her most prized possession. As they rode, she worked her bound hands, her fingers fumbling with the clasp at her neck. It took her an hour of painful, surreptitious effort, but she finally got it free. As they crossed a small, rocky creek bed, she let the locket fall from her hand, a tiny, Silver prayer dropped into the dust. It was a desperate, almost hopeless gesture. But she knew her father. She knew he would be looking. Ben found the locket the next afternoon. He had been tracking them at a relentless pace and had gained ground. They were only a few hours ahead of him now. He saw the place where they had crossed the creek, and he dismounted, his eyes scanning the ground with a meticulous, almost microscopic attention to detail. He saw the scuff print of a small boot, and then he saw it. A glint of silver, half buried in the sand. He knelt and picked up the locket, its delicate shape a painful, beautiful contrast in his large, calloused hand. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. It was a message, a cry for help, a declaration of faith. I am alive. I am fighting. I am waiting for you. The cold, hard engine of his rage was now superheated with a new, more potent fuel, hope. He was no longer just hunting a gang of killers. He was following a trail of love. He looked up from the locket, his blue eyes as hard and as clear as diamonds. He was close. He could feel it. The trail of ashes was behind him. The trail of blood lay just ahead. The trail led Ben into the broken lands, a desolate, jagged country of deep canyons and crumbling mesas that the law generally avoided. This was outlaw country, a place where a man could disappear. It was the natural habitat for a predator like Silas Croft. Ben knew this land. In his former life, he had hunted men through these same canyons. He knew the hidden water holes, the secret passes, the places where a man could watch without being seen. He slowed his pace, his senses now on a razor's edge. The careless, arrogant trail of the gang had become more cautious. They were nearing their den. He left his horse in a hidden box canyon and continued on foot, a silent, vengeful specter moving through the rocks. He climbed to a high, windswept mesa that overlooked a wide, secluded valley. And there, he saw it, the vulture's nest. It was not a simple outlaw camp. It was a small, fortified town. A collection of crude adobe and stone buildings were nestled against the sheer wall of a canyon, making them defensible from three sides. A single, narrow trail was the only way in or out. He could see a makeshift corral holding a large herd of stolen cattle, livestock from a half-dozen ruined ranches. He could see men, at least 30 of them, moving about with the casual confidence of soldiers in their own fortress. This was not just a gang. It was an army. The scope of Croft's operation was far greater than he had imagined. The burning of Harmony was not an isolated act of cruelty. It was a part of a larger, more ambitious plan of conquest. His heart went cold. A direct assault was suicide. He was one man against 30. He was the ghost of the Brazos, a legend, but he was not a god. He could not win a conventional fight. But he had not come here for a conventional fight. He spent the rest of the day on that high mesa, a patient, silent statue of stone and resolve. He watched the camp, his eyes memorizing every detail. He learned the patterns of the sentries, the location of the main bunkhouse, the separate, slightly larger building that had to be Croft's quarters. He saw where they kept their horses. And he saw Lily. They brought her out in the late afternoon. She was taken to a small, isolated cabin at the edge of the compound. She was no longer bound. 2 guards were posted outside her door. She was a prisoner, but she was also the prize, the leverage, and for now, she was being kept safe. Seeing her, alive and seemingly unharmed, was a balm to his raw, aching soul. It did not cool his rage, but it focused it into a single, sharp point. He knew what he had to do. He could not destroy Croft's army, but he could dismantle it. He could take it apart, piece by piece, from the inside out. He would not attack the fortress. He would become a disease within its walls, a silent, deadly plague that would turn their sanctuary into a tomb. As night fell, a deep, moonless blackness that swallowed the landscape, the ghost of the Brazos began his infiltration. He did not go down the main trail. He began a long, perilous descent down the sheer, crumbling cliff face at the back of the canyon, a path that no sane man would have attempted. He was not a sane man. He was a father, and he was a killer, and he was coming for his daughter. The descent down the cliff face was a nightmare of crumbling rock and dizzying drops, a test of will and strength that would have broken a lesser man. But Ben was not a man. He was a force of nature, his every muscle and nerve focused on the single, overriding purpose of his mission. He reached the canyon floor, a silent shadow detaching himself from the deeper shadows of the cliff, and the first stage of his one-man war began. He did not go for the guards, or for the bunkhouse. He went for the horses. An army without horses was an army of prisoners. He moved with a supernatural quiet, a ghost in the darkness, to the large, makeshift corral. A single, lazy sentry was posted there, a man leaning against a fence post, a lit cherub glowing in the dark. Ben did not use his guns. The sound would bring the whole camp down on him. He used the skills he had learned from the Apache trackers he had both hunted and ridden with in his youth. He became a whisper. The sentry never heard him. He never saw him. The man's last sensation on this earth was a large, powerful hand clamping over his mouth and the cold, sharp bite of a bowie knife drawn swift and silent across his throat. Ben dragged the body into the deep shadows under the corral fence. He then opened his canvas sack. He had not brought extra ammunition. He had brought the tools of his old trade, and his new one. He took out a small, heavy blacksmith's hammer and a handful of long, sharp, specially forged iron spikes. He moved to the gate of the corral. He did not open it. He began to work on the heavy wooden crossbar that held it shut, hammering the iron spikes deep into the wood, one after another, the sound muffled by a piece of thick leather. He was not just locking the gate. He was forging it shut, creating an iron and wood barrier that would take a dozen men with axes and arrows to break through. Then, he moved to the fence itself. He found the weak points, the places where a panicked herd would break through. He began to set his own kind of trap. He used his lariat, a few strategically placed rocks, and the deep, innate understanding of animal psychology he had learned as both a rancher and a hunter. His work done, he moved to the center of the corral. The horses, smelling the unfamiliar scent of a stranger, were restless, their whinnies a low, nervous murmur. He took a small, dry piece of leather from his pouch, and a flint and steel. He struck a spark. A tiny, hungry flame came to life. He gently placed it in a small pile of dry grass he had gathered. Then he let out a sound. It was not a human sound. It was the high, screaming, terrifying cry of a panther, a sound that strikes a primal, instinctive terror into the heart of any horse. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The entire herd, 50 strong, exploded in a frenzy of panic. They surged against the weakened sections of the fence he had prepared, and the crude barrier gave way. A tidal wave of panicked horseflesh thundered out of the corral and into the night, a wild, unstoppable stampede that crashed through the center of the outlaw camp. The camp, which had been a place of quiet, confident slumber, was transformed into a vision of hell. Men, jolted from their sleep, scrambled out of the bunkhouse, directly into the path of the thundering herd. The ground shook. Men screamed. The air was filled with the thunder of hoofs and the splintering crash of wood as the horses, in their blind terror, trampled everything in their path. Ben used the chaos as his cloak. While the outlaws were distracted by the stampede, he moved, a swift and deadly shadow, towards the small, isolated cabin where Lily was being held. The two guards, who had been dozing at their posts, were now on their feet, their rifles in their hands, staring in stunned disbelief at the chaos that had just been unleashed. They never saw Ben coming. He came at them from the darkness behind them, a whirlwind of silent, brutal efficiency. A single, powerful blow from the butt of his Colt sent one guard crashing to the ground, unconscious. The other guard turned, his eyes wide with surprise, and found himself looking into the cold, blue eyes of the ghost of an instant before a second blow sent him into a black, dreamless sleep. Ben smashed the lock on the cabin door with a single, powerful kick. He burst in, his Colts in his hands, his eyes wild. Lily was there, on a small cot, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a dawning, incredulous hope. "Father," she whispered. He was there. Her father had come. He had walked through hell, and he had come for her. The first whisper of death had been delivered to the vulture's nest. The reunion in the small cabin was a fleeting, desperate moment of relief in a sea of chaos. Ben holstered his pistols and knelt beside his daughter, his large hand gently touching her face, his eyes searching her for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a raw, emotional rasp. "No," she whispered, her own hands reaching up to touch his face. "I knew you would come." But their reunion was cut short by the sounds from outside. The initial chaos of the stampede was beginning to subside, replaced by the angry, organized shouts of Silas Croft. He was rallying his men, a cold, competent leader even in the face of disaster. To the main house, Croft's voice roared. Form a line. Find out who did this. Ben knew they had only moments. We have to go, he said, his voice hard again, the hunter returning. Now. He led her out of the cabin, back into the night. The main outlaw camp was now a hive of activity, torches flaring to life, men shouting, trying to impose order on the wreckage. We can't go back the way I came, Ben whispered, gesturing to the sheer cliff face. We have to go through them. His plan was not to escape. Not yet. His mission was not just to rescue his daughter, it was to destroy Silas Croft. To leave now would be to leave the snake wounded, but still alive, able to strike again. He led her not towards the main trail out of the canyon, but towards the deep, impenetrable darkness of the stables and the blacksmith's forge at the far end of the compound. It was the one place he knew would offer both cover and resources. They moved with a desperate, coordinated stealth, to ghosts in the night, using the confusion and the deep shadows as their allies. They reached the forge, a large, stone and wood structure, and slipped inside, the familiar smell of coal smoke and hot iron a strange, comforting presence for Ben. From the dirty window of the forge, they could see the outlaws, their torches a collection of angry, moving fireflies, beginning a systematic search of the camp. They were fanning out, checking the buildings, their initial panic replaced by a cold, methodical anger. They'll find us here, Lily whispered, her heart pounding. Yes, Ben replied, his voice a low, calm rumble. I'm counting on it. He was not just hiding. He was preparing his next battlefield. He looked around the forge, his blacksmith's eye seeing not just tools, but weapons. The heavy sledges, the sharp-edged tongs, the glowing embers in the forge itself. He barred the heavy wooden doors of the forge. He then went to the massive, leather bellows that fed air to the fire. He began to pump. The embers in the forge began to glow, a dull red at first, then a brighter orange, and finally, a fierce, white-hot heat that cast a demonic, dancing light on his grim, determined face. He had spent 10 years of his life banking the fires of the killer he used to be. Tonight, he was stoking them back to life. Outside, Croft's men found the bodies of the sentries, the one at the corral and the two at the cabin. The whispers of a single, silent killer among them grew to a terrified certainty. They also found the forge-shut gate of the corral, a clear, unmistakable sign that the man they were dealing with was not just a ghost, but a blacksmith. All eyes, and all guns, now turned towards the one place in the camp where a blacksmith would go, the forge. Silas Croft himself led the group. He stood before the heavy, barred doors of the forge, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. The stampede had cost him half his horses and 3 of his men. The silent killer had taken 3 more. His army was being dismantled from within. Travis, Croft's voice roared, a sound of pure, venomous hatred. I know you're in there. I know what you are. I heard the stories on the Brazos. The ghost. You should have stayed dead. There was no answer from within the forge. Only the low, rhythmic, and deeply unsettling sound of the bellows, like a great, sleeping beast, breathing in the darkness. You have his daughter in there, Croft continued, trying a new tactic. You think I won't burn this place to the ground with her in it? Send her out, Travis. Send her out, and I might let you die quickly. A new, terrible silence fell. Ben looked at Lily, his face a mask of agonizing conflict. He had brought her here, to this place, and now he had trapped her. But Lily, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fire that matched the one in the forge, simply shook her head. She picked up a heavy, iron crowbar and stood beside her father. They were in this together. To the end. Ben looked at his daughter, at her fierce, unwavering resolve, and a great, profound love and pride swelled in his heart. He turned back towards the door. The time for whispers was over. He walked to the far end of the forge, where a small, secondary furnace was used for tempering steel. He opened the valve of a large, connected tank. The hiss of flammable gas filled the air. He then went to the main forge. He took a long, iron rod and thrust its tip into the white-hot heart of the coals until it glowed a bright, angry cherry red. He walked back to the main doors, the glowing rod in his hand. Croft, he called out, his voice a deep, resonant boom that was no longer the voice of a blacksmith, but the voice of a judge. You wanted fire. I'll give you fire. He unbarred the door and threw it wide open. And as Croft and his men raised their rifles, expecting a charge, Ben threw the white-hot iron rod, like a spear, towards the gas-filled furnace at the back of the forge. The night, and the long, terrible burning, had just begun. The forge erupted in a deafening, concussive roar. The cloud of flammable gas ignited, creating a massive, rolling fireball that blasted out of the open doors, a dragon's breath of pure, incinerating heat. The outlaws who had been crowded in front of the doors, ready to charge, were caught in the inferno. They were not just burned, they were consumed, their screams a brief, terrible chorus that was instantly silenced by the all-consuming flame. Silas Croft and the men who had been standing further back were thrown from their feet, their clothes singed, their faces flash-burned. The sound of the explosion, a physical blow that left their ears ringing and their minds reeling in stunned, uncomprehending shock. The forge itself was now a raging inferno, the dry wooden roof catching instantly, turning the entire structure into a towering pillar of fire. From a small, pre-planned escape hatch at the back of the forge, a place hidden behind a stack of coal, Ben and Lily scrambled out into the night, their faces grimy, their eyes wide with the sheer, terrible power of the destruction they had unleashed. They had used the tools of creation to create a moment of absolute, hellish destruction. The survivors of Croft's gang were scattered, their discipline completely shattered. They were no longer a cohesive army. They were a handful of terrified, wounded men, their leader momentarily stunned, their sanctuary now a funeral pyre. This was the moment Ben had been waiting for. This was the turning point. Stay here, he commanded Lily, pushing her into the deep shadows of a nearby stable. Stay down. He then became the ghost again. He did not charge the disorganized group. He began to hunt the survivors, one by one. He moved through the chaotic, firelit landscape of the vulture's nest, a silent, avenging wraith. He used the confusion, the deep shadows cast by the burning forge, the panicked shouts of the outlaws, as his weapons. A man, his mind broken by the blast, was trying to crawl away into the darkness. A single, merciful shot from Ben's Colt ended his suffering. Two others had taken cover behind a water trough, firing wildly at the forge, thinking their enemy was still inside. Ben came at them from the side, a dark, silent shape in the smoke. The fight was brutally short, a flurry of motion and two sharp, distinct gunshots. Silas Croft, his face a mask of blackened, blistering rage, had finally recovered his senses. He saw his army, his empire, being dismantled before his eyes by a single, unstoppable demon. He had 2 men left. To my quarters, he roared, his voice a raw, desperate rasp. Get the Gatling gun. It was his final, desperate gambit. A weapon of mass destruction, a hand-crank machine gun he had acquired for just such a last stand. As Croft and his last 2 men made a run for the main house, Ben saw them. He knew he could not let them reach that gun. He broke from his cover and charged, his 2 Colts now in his hands, barking a steady, deadly rhythm. One of Croft's men went down, clutching his leg. The other turned, firing his own pistol, providing a covering fire for his boss. Ben and the outlaw traded shots in a desperate, running gunfight across the open, firelit ground. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Ben's shirt, a searing, white-hot line of pain along his arm. He ignored it. He fired again, and the last of Croft's men pitched forward into the dust. Now, only Croft was left. He had made it to the porch of his house. He scrambled inside, barricading the door. Ben stood alone in the center of the compound, the fire from the burning forge at his back, the bodies of Croft's army scattered around him. He was a singular, terrible figure of retribution, a blacksmith who had turned his entire world into a devil's forge to temper the steel of his own righteous wrath. He began to walk, slowly, deliberately, towards the house where the last of the serpents was hiding. The long, bloody hunt was almost over. The final, personal reckoning was at hand. The main house of the vulture's nest was now the final fortress. Silas Croft was inside, wounded, alone, and cornered. The sounds from within were a frantic, desperate cacophony, the crash of furniture being piled against the door, the splintering of wood as he barricaded the windows. Ben did not charge the house. He was a patient hunter, and his prey was trapped. He reloaded his Colts with a slow, deliberate calm, his mind a cold, calculating machine. The gash on his arm was bleeding freely, a dull, throbbing counterpoint to the fierce, burning fire of his resolve. Lily emerged from the shadows of the stables, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. She ran to him, tearing a strip of cloth from her own dress to create a makeshift bandage for his arm. "Father, you're hurt," she whispered, her hands surprisingly steady as she tied the bandage. "It's nothing," he said, his voice a low, grim rumble. He looked at the fortified house. "He's in there. It ends tonight." "Let me help," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "I can draw his fire. I can create a diversion." "No," he said, his voice absolute, the command of a father and a war chief. "You have been brave, my lily flower. Braver than any man I have ever known. But this last part, this is my work. This is a promise I made to your mother, a long time ago. A promise I made to myself." He turned and looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw not the ghost, not the killer, but her father, his face filled with a love so fierce and so profound it took her breath away. "Stay here," he said. "And when this is over, we are going home." He turned and began his final approach. He did not go to the front door. He circled around to the back of the house, to the dark and watch side. He had seen the Gatling gun being unloaded from a wagon weeks ago. He knew it was a heavy, cumbersome beast, mounted on a tripod. It could only fire in one direction at a time. Croft would have it trained on the front, expecting a direct assault. Ben found a window, its glass shattered, its frame hastily boarded up. With the silent, powerful strength of his blacksmith's arms, he ripped the boards from the frame. He slipped through the window and into the house, the ghost entering the serpent's lair. The house was a den of stolen luxury, the floors covered in fine Navajo rugs, the walls adorned with silver-inlaid saddles and expensive rifles. It was a monument to Croft's greed. He could hear Croft in the front room cursing, moving the heavy machine gun, preparing for the final siege. Ben moved through the house with a supernatural quiet, his moccasins making no sound on the wooden floors. He was in his element, a predator in the enclosed, deadly space of the hunt. He reached the doorway of the main parlor. He saw Croft, his back to him, frantically trying to feed an ammunition belt into the Gatling gun, which was pointed at the front door. Ben did not shoot him in the back. That was not his way. His justice, his vengeance, required a final, face-to-face reckoning. "Croft," he said, his voice a low, quiet sound that was more shocking than any shout in the silent room. Silas Croft froze. He spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, animal terror. He had been so focused on the enemy at his door that he had never once considered that the enemy was already inside. He fumbled for the pistol at his belt, but he was too slow. Ben was not. His Colt was in his hand, cocked and steady. But he did not fire. "It's over," Ben said, his voice a flat, empty sound. "You've lost. Your men are dead. Your empire is in ashes. There's nothing left to fight for." A strange, transformative madness entered Croft's eyes. He had been beaten, but he would not be taken. He let go of his pistol and, with a final, defiant roar, he lunged for the crank of the Gatling gun. If he was going to die, he was going to take the whole world with him, to unleash one final, indiscriminate storm of lead. Ben fired. He fired once. The shot was not aimed at Croft's heart or his head. It was aimed with a blacksmith's cold, mechanical precision. The bullet struck the complex firing mechanism of the Gatling gun, the part that fed the cartridges into the chamber. There was a sharp, metallic clang, a shower of sparks, and the machine gun was rendered a useless, silent piece of iron. Croft stared at the ruined weapon, then at Ben, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending defeat. He had been disarmed and manned, his final, terrible weapon broken by the very man he had tried to destroy. Ben walked towards him, his Colt still held ready. The final promise, the one forged in the fire of this long, terrible night, was about to be kept. The parlor of Silas Croft's stolen home became a silent courtroom. The only light came from the hellish, flickering glow of the burning forge outside, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The two men faced each other, the victor and the vanquished, their long, bloody history finally culminating in this single, final moment. Croft, his final, desperate gambit with the Gatling gun shattered, seemed to shrink in on himself. The arrogance, The cruel confidence, it all drained away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a man, his face a pasty, sweat-slicked mask of fear. "You won't kill me," Croft stammered, his voice a pathetic, wheezing sound. "You won't. You're not a killer. Not anymore. You're a blacksmith. A town man." He was trying to appeal to the man Ben had tried to become, to the ghost of his better nature. Ben just looked at him, his blue eyes as cold and as empty as a winter sky. "You burned my town," he said, his voice a low, flat monotone, each word a heavy, deliberate hammer blow. "You murdered my neighbors. You put your filthy hands on my daughter." He took a step closer. "You're right. I'm not the ghost of the Brazos anymore. He died a long time ago. You know who I am now, Silas. I'm the father of the girl you stole. I'm the husband of the woman whose grave you danced on. And I'm the blacksmith who is about to send you to the hottest corner of Hell's own forge." He raised his Colt, the hammer clicking back with a sound of absolute finality. Croft's bravado finally, irrevocably shattered. He crumpled to his knees, his hands held up in a pleading gesture, his face a mess of tears and terror. "Please," he sobbed. "Don't. I'll give you anything. Money. Land. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Ben looked down at the pathetic, weeping man at his feet. He saw not a monster, not a devil, but a weak, pathetic creature, a bully who had been stripped of his power. And in that moment, a profound, weary clarity settled over him. To kill this man now would not be an act of justice. It would be an act of rage. It would be to let the ghost, the killer he had tried so hard to bury, win the final victory. It would be to become the very thing he was trying to destroy. His daughter, Lily. He had to be the man she believed him to be. The gentle, giant blacksmith. The father who had come through Hull to save her. Slowly, deliberately, he uncocked the hammer of his Colt and holstered it. "Get up," he said, his voice a low, disgusted growl. Croft stared at him, his mind unable to comprehend the sudden, unexpected mercy. "I said, get up," and repeated, his voice harder this time. He hauled the man to his feet. "You're not worth the bullet. You're not worth the rage. You're going to be taken back, and you're going to face the law. You're going to rot in a cage, Silas. And every day, for the rest of your miserable life, you're going to remember the name of the town you burned, and the face of the blacksmith who broke you." He marched the man out of the house, out into the firelit chaos of the vulture's nest. He found Lily, waiting for him, her face a pale, anxious mask in the shadows. When she saw him, with Croft as his prisoner, a wave of profound, overwhelming relief washed over her. Her father had won, and he had not lost himself in the process. They found a small, secure storeroom and locked Croft inside. The weighing of his soul was over. The judgment had been passed. And it was a judgment of life, a life of imprisonment and shame, a fate far more terrible to a man like Croft than a quick, clean death. As the first, pale light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, Ben and Lily stood together and looked out over the smoking ruins of the Outlaws' camp. The fire in the forge was dying down, its hungry rage now just a bed of glowing, red embers. Ben felt a profound, bone-deep weariness, but it was a clean kind of tired. The rage was gone. The ghost was quiet. He reached out and pulled his daughter into a fierce, protective embrace. He had walked through the fire, and he had brought back the only thing in the world that truly mattered. The soul of Ben Travis, the blacksmith of Harmony, had been weighed in the balance, and it had not been found wanting. The return to the valley was a slow, somber journey. Ben and Lily, leading a single horse with the bound and broken form of Silas Croft slung over its saddle, were met on the trail by a small, grim-faced posse from Harmony. The townspeople, seeing the smoke from the distant battle, had feared the worst, but had gathered their courage and ridden out to face it, a testament to the new, hard-won spirit that had been forged in the fire of their shared tragedy. The sight of Ben and Lily, alive, with their tormentor as their captive, was a moment of profound, quiet triumph. There were no cheers, no shouts of victory. There was only a deep, collective sigh of relief, and a new, unwavering respect in the eyes of the men as they looked at the blacksmith who had become their avenger. The town of Harmony was not the same place they had left. The ashes had been cleared. The work of rebuilding had already begun, the sound of hammers and saws a defiant, hopeful rhythm in the quiet valley. The people of Harmony had not just been waiting. They had been working, forging their own future from the ruins of their past. Silas Croft was delivered to the U.S. Marshals, and the story of his downfall, and of the ghost of the Brazos, became a whispered legend across the territory. But in Harmony, the legend was a more personal one. It was the story of their blacksmith, their neighbor, their friend. Ben Travis returned to his forge. He picked up his hammer, its weight familiar, comforting, real. But he was not the same man. The ghost was not gone, but it was no longer a thing of rage and darkness. It was a part of him now, a source of quiet strength, a reminder of the terrible price of peace. He had integrated the two halves of his soul, the creator and the destroyer, and had become something new, something whole. He was no longer just the blacksmith. He was the protector. He became the town's unofficial leader, its steady, unshakable center. He helped them rebuild, his powerful arms and his practical wisdom a driving force in the forging of the new Harmony. Lily, too, had been transformed. The fiery, innocent girl was gone, replaced by a young woman of quiet, formidable strength. She had seen the worst of the world, and she had not broken. She worked alongside her father, a partner in the rebuilding of their lives and their community. The bond between them, always strong, was now a thing of tempered, unbreakable steel. The seasons turned. The new buildings rose from the ashes, stronger and more defiant than before. The scars on the land, and on their hearts, began to heal. One evening, a year later, Ben stood with Lily on the porch of their rebuilt home. The town of Harmony was quiet, bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. The sounds were those of life, the distant laughter of children, the lowing of cattle, the soft murmur of neighbors talking over a fence line. "It's a good place, Father," Lily said, her voice a soft, contented murmur. Ben put his arm around her, a gesture of profound, quiet love. He looked out at the town he had fought for, the daughter he had walked through hell to save, the peace he had forged with his own two hands. "Yes, Lily Flower," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, the sound of a man who was finally, completely at peace. "It's a good place. It's home." The bandits had come to burn a town and steal a blacksmith's daughter. They had not known that in the heart of that simple, quiet man, a fire burned far hotter than any they could ever have imagined. They had tried to destroy Harmony, but they had only succeeded in tempering its steel, and in the process, had reminded a retired killer of the one true thing worth fighting and living for.